2011 saw the release of Quarantine 2 Terminal, but would it prove terminal to the franchise, or would it prove treatable? Hi guys, and welcome to the final part of my joint Rec and Quarantine review series. It's sort of been like having two co-hosts of a soccer World Cup, I guess. So I was relieved that this second Quarantine film was going to do its own thing. I didn't want it to just remake Rec 2 like Quarantine 1 was just a remake of Rec 1, because as good a film as Quarantine is, I didn't really feel like I needed that story again, and I was relieved when I found out that Quarantine 2 was going to take its own direction. And then I was especially curious when I found out what the actual plot was going to be about, because this film promised to be in an airport. Now, on paper, the idea of a zombie film in an airport is just mouth-watering. The geography of an airport is very varied. It would be perfect for something like this. You've got all those wide open spaces out on the runways, and inside you've got all these varied areas like ticket offices and baggage compartments and all those secret areas like what you see in Die Hard 2 with Marvin. And so I was very curious to see what they could do with this, but I was a little bit worried about whether the budget would allow them to do an airport zombie film convincingly. Quarantine 2, a direct-to-video sequel, was hardly going to have the production scale of something like World War Z with Brad Pitt. So I was concerned, certainly. But to give you an idea of the story, we start off actually on a plane heading away from an airport, at least once all the characters have got done loading their luggage up and stuff. So I wondered to myself at this point, okay, are we going to have like a Jason takes a boat to Manhattan sort of situation here where we don't get what we're promised on the box? And I started to think to myself what a zombie film on a plane would look like. I guess you could do that as long as you kept the film fairly low-key and character-driven. But it turns out, no, we're just going into the air for a short time until the outbreak has properly started, and then the plane is going to come swiftly back to the airport in a panic, and all the passengers are going to get off, and then we get the second, much longer part of the film that takes place in the airport, and all the characters discover that the airport is now abandoned because the outbreak has also been in the surrounding city area, because I presume it's spread out from the apartment building from Quarantine 1, which is in the same sort of neck of the woods. So on paper, a great treatment, I think. If somebody explained to me the plot for this film in the pub as an idea that they wanted to sort of type up on their computer or something, I'd be like, yeah, get that down. That sounds awesome. Outbreak on a plane and then it spreads down to the airport. Absolutely sounds top notch. But again, it comes down to, though, whether the money was there to do this sort of thing convincingly, because it's a very ambitious idea. The film was directed by a guy called John Pogue, who would go on to do Deep Blue Sea 3, another direct-to-video sequel, obviously just cashing in on the brand name. But Deep Blue Sea 3 is actually better than the original film, in my opinion. I'm not the biggest fan of the original Deep Blue Sea with Samuel L. Jackson and all that pomp and budget that they've got. Third film better for me, even though it's got less money to work with. And Deep Blue Sea 3 has got one of the best final deaths of a shark I've ever seen. It's absolutely awesome. So I think Pogue is a man with a bit of skill in his locker. And I noticed on his filmography that his latest film that he's working on at the moment is A Razor Reborn, a sequel to the Schwarzenegger film from the mid-90s. Obviously, he's not going to have Schwarzenegger this time, but that is ambitious. I mean, doing a much cheaper sequel to a very expensive blockbuster. I think he might struggle with that one, but he definitely pulled it off with Deep Blue Sea 3, and I'm about to tell you whether he pulled it off with Quarantine 2. Yes, he could pull it off with Quarantine 2. This is a pretty good sequel, actually. No, the airport doesn't actually look like an airport for the most part, but given that we spend most of the second half of the film in some kind of industrial area just beneath the main portion of the airport, I guess it doesn't really matter. But this film is really exciting all the way through. It's very unpredictable. But if I go back to the beginning of the story again, we hit gold with this pretty much from the opening scene, because watching all these people getting onto this plane, there's a lot of tension in the air, and because we don't get to the zombie stuff straight away, we get to know the characters quite a bit. And on a personal level, I don't much like flying. So watching these characters taking off in this plane, it kind of took me back to plane journeys that have made me feel really uncomfortable. Plus, the film doesn't tell you where the virus is going to spring up from. I had no idea which of these passengers was carrying the virus. Another way to have done this film would have been to have had a prologue where you would have seen a character running through the airport with a bite, like trying to keep it hidden, and he's in a panic and he thinks somehow his problem will be helped if he flees the country or whatever, and he gets onto a plane, and okay, there still would have been tension in that situation, wondering when this passenger was going to turn, but it's much better done like this because we don't know who the hell has the virus, and the film sort of plays a few tricks on you. So just after the plane has taken off, we get a scene in the cockpit where I think one of the pilots sort of, a little bit of blood comes out of his nose or something, and he sort of wipes it off or something like that, and his co-pilot says, aha, I think you might want to get that looked at when we touch down in Lisbon or whatever. And I'm thinking to myself, it's the pilot, it's the pilot. But then a couple of minutes later, we're back in the main cabin, and one of the characters is loading a box of gerbils into the overhead compartment, and the guy next to him just reaches up to kind of pet the gerbils or something, and he gets bitten, and he's like, oh, didn't expect that from a gerbil. And at that moment, I'm thinking, oh, actually, it's the gerbils that've got the virus. I think I just wanted to get a microphone and speak through the tannoy system on this plane just to keep everybody up to date as to where I personally thought the virus might be, but obviously I couldn't do that. And then we get another moment a few minutes later where one of the passengers sneezes, and so by this point I'm thinking this is deliberate, the film's just messing with me, like it's trying to show me all these different potential people who could have the virus. And you know what, just in case you haven't seen the film, I'm not going to let you know which person it turns out to be, but there's a big panic. It's very exciting because everything goes to hell on this plane, and they have to do a U-turn and go back to the airport. But once they arrive back at the terminal, they realise that in the short time they've been in the air, everything's been going on down in the main airport. Like it's just been completely abandoned. I guess most people realise there was an outbreak and they've run off, or maybe there are just dead people in the main customer areas. But we don't know that because there are lots of locked doors in the airport, and so the passengers from the plane sort of end up in this, like I said earlier, this area just beneath the main airport, and that's where the main thrust of the film takes place. There's a great moment where they realise that police have surrounded the airport, and one of the characters looks out the window, and you see the plastic tarp comes down, and it's see-through, and you can sort of hear distant guns and loudspeakers and things. It reminds you of the original film, but I like that because this film could have ended up just being a zombie film in a different location that just happens to have the quarantine title slapped on it, but they've really tried hard to make it a proper sequel, and they've done that in two ways. Firstly, they do eventually tie the story into the apartment block situation. Secondly, they've got this visual moment where you see that tarp come down, and when that happened, I just thought to myself, oh, you're in for it now, because when that comes down, you know that nobody's getting out. It's such a wreck and quarantine thing. So I've got a DVD for this, and it occurred to me that what they should have done with the menus on the DVD is to just have a tarp, that same tarp come down, and when it comes down, it's got the play menu and scene selection thing on it. You know what? I think I might actually write off to them and suggest that, just in case they're ever planning a Blu-ray. The main character in this is Jenny, played by Mercedes Mason. Not someone I've ever heard of before. That name, though, does carry the whiff of stage name about it somehow. But she does fine in this. Jenny is one of the air stewardesses from the plane. She's your typical sort of happy-go-lucky gal just trying to make the best of a bad situation. The actress does sort of remind me of Bianca Katchlich from Halloween Resurrection somehow. She's just got that sort of vibe about her. None of the other characters really stand out, I'd say, but none of them are bad either. There's no one in this who will have you shouting at the screen, oh, can somebody please eat him, he's getting on my nerves. There's nobody really like that, I'd say. There's one terrific scene in the second half of the film where some of the CDC guys come in from the outside carrying machine guns and briefcases full of vials, and they want to cure the remaining characters basically with the vaccine that they supposedly have, but it's all a bit sus because all of these vials are in different colours and our protagonists aren't quite sure whether to let these guys put this stuff into their bodies, sort of thing. So we get this really high tension sort of standoff that sort of reminded me a little bit of that scene in The Thing where Kurt Russell is testing everybody's blood. It's a little bit like that, where you know that, or you suspect that by the end of the scene, things are just going to go to hell. In terms of criticisms of this film, I think my only one really is just that it's not that bloody on the whole, I'd say. I mean, most of the kills in this are quite exciting and unpredictable, which is great, but they don't really bring the gore, you know. Everybody has different levels of gore that they like to see in certain films. For me personally, Terrifier level of gore is a little bit too much, but in a zombie film, I still want some splatter. I still want some good red stuff being thrown around, and this film doesn't quite bring that. I'd say there's one really good kill where this one zombie gets crushed by this machinery, but on the whole, a lot of the kills feel a little bit bloodless, but that's probably my only criticism. I really enjoyed this film. I think it's an excellent sequel. It did leave me craving a Quarantine 3 that we will never get. I mean, this second one was made way back in 2011, and there's still not been any more since then. So it is a done series, but if you like zombie films, then I would absolutely add this to your bucket list. It's not like there's a whole lot of zombie films set in an airport out there. The only one I can think of is an animated film, actually. It was one of the Resident Evil animated films. I can't remember which one it was, only that I'm pretty sure it was the very first Resident Evil animated film. Some of that takes place in an airport, but you know what? This film is better, and that other one is animated anyway. So I'll quickly show you the version of the film that I've got for this. As alluded to earlier, I have this on DVD, and here it is. The fear is spreading is what it says at the bottom of the box, and you know what? It is not lying. I don't think there is any features on this. No, pretty much none. Picture quality, fine. It's your typical sort of DVD era grain, I guess, but for a film like this, it's not a problem at all. Right, let's get to the bag of terror and find out what sort of score I'm going to give this film. Got 1, 2, 3, 4 bloody axes out of 5. This is a surprisingly excellent sequel. It is highly recommended, and I thoroughly enjoyed it, and I can definitely see myself watching it in the future. To be honest, I think I'm going to have way more motivation in the future to watch Quarantine 2 than Quarantine 1, because I don't need Quarantine 1, I've got Rec 1, if you see what I mean. Now, I am going to do a rankings video ranking all the Quarantine and Rec films, but I might just delay that video for a while, because I did promise one of the subscribers that I would do an up-to-date Halloween rankings, but I'm hoping maybe before the end of the year I will get around to that Quarantine and Rec rankings. I've really enjoyed this review series. It's put me in the mood, actually, to get some more zombie films out, do some more zombie-themed reviews. I'm thinking of doing the 28 Days Later duo of films and maybe the Zombie Diaries films, maybe a bit of George Romero. We will see. But for now, I am calling time on this review series. Thank you for joining me, and I will leave you with this one last pearl of wisdom. Do not put your fingers in gerbils' mouths. You don't know where they've been. Cheerio.